everybody. This is Carol Muleta. Welcome to the Parenting 411 podcast, where we share information parents need from sources they can trust. Today's episode is all about advocacy, resilience, and navigating the educational system for our children. I am thrilled to be joined by Jammie Carr, a private investigator with over 20 years of experience in social services and culture-specific care. She's also a mother of 3 adult children, and she is now raising 2 more through Kinship adoption. So Jammie will share her personal journey as a parent, an adoption worker, and an advocate for Black children, especially those with individualized education plans, otherwise known as IEPs. She'll open up about the challenges she's faced in ensuring her boys receive the support they deserve at school and how she has overcome the barriers. If you've ever wondered how to confidently and boldly advocate for your child, this episode truly is for you. So why don't we dive in? Welcome and thank you for joining me, Jammie.
Thank you for having me, Carol. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, your journey as a private investigator is fascinating. So I'd love to talk about that, learn how you got started there, and then how your work in social services and culture-specific care has shaped your career and your advocacy for Black children.
Yes. Well, Carol, it has been a long, tangled road because it wasn't a straight line to get here.
Okay.
When I went to college, I thought I was going to be a police officer or some kind of probation and parole. Once I started going to school for that, I started going to Portland State Local University, downtown Portland, to obtain my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I quickly found out that that's not what I wanted to do. I did go back and get my master's in criminal justice, but I still know I wanted to work with a prison-affected population. But I knew that the traditional course of going there, like working for the police, what I had in mind was not going to happen. So I knew that I wanted to work hands-on with people of color. And so that led me to social services. There's always a need for people in social services, but just to be honest, it's a field of work that is highly underpaid, but just a much needed resources for people to feel connected, to seek the services they need in their vulnerable state in our community.
I couldn't agree with you more. Social services is a vital resource for families. And so often we hear of social workers and others in that space having a heavy caseload and really working hard, and sometimes children fall through the cracks. But what I always see is that the social workers and the staff themselves are just so passionate about what they do, and they really care about children's welfare and the stability of families. And I applaud you and all social workers in that regard. Thank you for what you do.
Yeah, well, thank you, Carol, for acknowledging that. That webbed onto different, branches of social services, whether it be domestic violence, drugs and alcohol treatment. I worked with juveniles as well as adults, going into mental health services, and then finally, I ended up working in adoption, a program that helped people that were affected by using the jails and the hospitals as mental health care for services. So there's been a host of services. Most of them had slots for culture-specific providers. Here in Portland, which is one of our widest cities here in the United States, connecting people of color to services has been a challenge. But they noticed that once they started making space for culture-specific providers, just being able to build relationship a lot faster have been established, and then establishing long-term relationships with families and the programs were more effective and efficient. So I think that has been something that's been a valuable find, to know that people of color and minority communities, especially when we're small numbers, really need that extra support. People that look like them, to make sure that they stay in those services and that they're real upfront about what their challenges are with accessing those services.
I'm glad to hear that. Now, I know that you've raised 3 adult children, and you also have shared that you are raising 2 younger children through kinship adoption. And so I'm wondering what differences or challenges are you noticing in parenting this time around versus the first time?
I think especially with my boys, I can see a lot closer similarities just because of in school. In the school, I had to always advocate and be present for my son, versus my girls didn't have the same issue.
Mm, mhm.
But I must say, with the kinship adoption and with children that are being raised by people that are other than their biological parents, we also see an extra layer of trauma that I must say I didn't necessarily see straight on with my children.
Right.
You see the ramifications of my trauma and their dad trauma, the secondary nature of it, but the primary, when you see children who are, in a sense, ripped out of the arms of their biological parents and placed in different, because these children first lived with another family member,
Mhm.
and then they moved with us after a couple years, 2 years of living outside of their parents' care, and then another, once they lived with us. And I know that that was just an extra layer of, rules and learning to how to navigate households and different say
Mhm.
so and different just styles altogether. It
Mhm.
showed me how resilient they were, but as adults, how kind of inflexible we can be, expecting them to mold
Mhm.
into our way of being instead of the other way around, or even meeting them halfway. So,
Mhm. And I've interviewed a few people on the topic of adoption, whether they work in adoption services or they've personally adopted. And one mom really said something to me, and I really hadn't thought about it. A lot of times when you hear that children have been adopted, you're like, oh, they're so lucky. Oh, this is so wonderful, such a blessing. But there's an event that involves some loss that
yeah.
led to the adoption. And yes, it is wonderful that they've been adopted, they've found their forever home, but parents and others in the village that are supporting that child have to still acknowledge that there was some loss first before moving into this situation that, of course, we pray will be much better and over the long term and will carry them on through to adulthood. And I don't know. That's just something that I hadn't thought about how important that is. I mean, obviously that's why they're being adopted, but it's not like there's just a light switch that switches on and they're like, hey, I've got a family now. And they forget all of what they've been through.
Yeah. Yes, or everything is kind of where everybody grabs each other's hand and skip into the sunset, because it's behind the scenes, it's a lot more real than that. And I think,
Hmm.
especially if you're going through it, you can have some, maybe even shame and guilt about around just having a real experiences and real feelings about having to do hard work, especially when it was unexpected and kind of came out of left field. But just the community, being able to be self-aware enough to say, I'm not equipped to really deal with this. I need support. I need help. And I even say kudos to the community who had a lot of resources, a lot of them not, disjointed, but you have to really do a lot of your own work and advocacy and being connected to communities and resources to know what's out there. But it can be done. And I must
Hmm.
say, I'd be nothing without the resources that were made available to me by the community and by other programs that the children were connected to.
Mhm, mhm. And it sounds like you personally are a resource to many children and families as well. Like, for example, your advocacy for children who have special needs. And so I know there may be some parents who aren't familiar with IEPs. I am. I had a son who had an IEP throughout his entire K through 12 experience. So let's talk about that. Why don't you go ahead and describe it for our audience, individualized education plan and why it's so important.
Yes. And this is another thing that was new for me with taking on my second round of children is having an IEP. It was
Mm,
individualized educational plan
mm,
where as They identify children who may not learn in the same manner as most kids, and it kind of flags them for needing additional supports to be able to learn and grow in a manner that is conducive with the environment. And so,
Mhm.
just a, I guess, long-winded way to say this is just a plan that makes sure that children who may fall through the cracks, if they don't have the supports they need, they
Mhm.
actually learn, on their own terms, learn and participate in school in a manner that is effective for them.
Mhm, mhm, and I believe so they can have a fair and appropriate education.
Yes. And
Mhm.
then, have a plan to finish the cross the finish line with their peers. It,
Right, right. Yes, yeah, that was, definitely my experience, and I'm happy to say my son finished high school on time, went to college, and actually finished in 4 years.
yes, yes,
So it really can make a difference for children to get that support early, when they need it.
I agree. I
Mhm.
mean, there is some mixed feelings out in the community because it depends on who I was talking to. Whereas, oh, he's an IEP, he's been, identified as getting the supports he need. Great, great. And then on the other note, there is this sense of I wouldn't let them put him on that. I wouldn't let them write that into existence. They shouldn't put that in his school file. That's going to follow him wherever he goes. And so there's this kind of double-mindedness about if it's helpful or if it's not. And just on a person that has experienced both sides of that, I can
Mhm.
say it's more helpful than it is not. A
Right.
lot of the time, what's not so helpful is that we can use this really fancy, dressed up language to speak to what we want to do, but then when it starts comes to putting it to action, that is a whole different game. And so I
Mhm.
think being able to align the two as an
Mhm.
advocate and being able to know the difference when the school is, just serving lip service versus actually putting that IEP and making it come to life. You can
Mhm.
tell if your child is really kind of we I was only been able to gauge that by how my child responds to it.
Mhm. Mhm. And so for some parents that just may not recognize that the IEP and the services and the supports are there to support their child, how can they identify if their children really need an IEP and what steps should they take to initiate the process?
I think a lot of the time we can just gauge off of the behaviors of our children. I saw your SB award where you spoke and you talked about, understanding over discipline, learning to
Oh, connection before correction.
exactly, exactly. And so just that was powerful because it took me a while to get there, but I realized that's exactly like these kids, just because they come into your house and they see how much you do for them doesn't mean they're bought in. You actually have to, they have to, and because they're on an IEP doesn't mean that they're looking to you to answer. They feel like, I think some kids don't automatically feel like they need the supports and help that you're trying to get them.
Right.
And so it really becomes imperative that I had to start getting kind of on my son's level and helping him understand why we were doing this because he was feeling like this is embarrassing me. You're causing too much attention to me, and I don't want this attention. I just want to stay in the class, and
Mhm.
I just want to continue to get in trouble, and I just want to continue to get Fs because that's kind of how he started to identify himself.
Oh, okay.
And so I think for me, it started to be I got a lot more involved, and I think COVID was really the big tell all because when I became the teacher, because
Mm.
that was mandated, I could see how much he really could learn with that one on one, just sitting down and working with him.
Mhm.
Versus before, where he would say he couldn't do it, and the teachers would say he couldn't do it, and so he wasn't doing it. But
Right.
I was able to see he can do it. He can learn he wants to learn. It is hard for him, but once he started learning, you could just see his eyes light up and a little
Mhm.
bit of confidence. His head held up a little bit higher, and he wasn't no longer this kid that was looking for a distraction, looking to make a distraction so he could get out of doing his work.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask you too, like, what the impact was on him and the realization for him, going forward. So you think he noticed, he realized the difference it could make having a little support.
Yes, yes. I can still say to this day, if it were up to him, he would not want the support, but we can visibly see the impact, even at a new school this year that has said,
Mhm.
wow, he's come leaps and bounds in a short amount of time. And it's
Mhm.
with a school that's willing to back up what they put in writing.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, I think it is really important for them to learn what their needs are and advocate for themselves,
Yes.
and you know do the work, and maybe they can loosen up some of the oversight, and they can do a little bit more on their own. I had a conversation like that once with my son because we were looking for his next school, and it was his middle school. And we had visited one school, and he he had to do a shadow visit there, and he felt like it was just too much support. This just was not the place for him. And so he actually, when one of the counselors came in to see how he and other students who were visiting were doing, and he asked her, "Can you call my mom? This isn't the place for me. Can you call my mother?" And so she said that, I'll check with her, but she also felt like from me, in interacting with me, that I would want him to finish out the day and see how things were going. So she didn't end up calling me. And so then when I picked him up, she told me about this conversation they had, and she said, "I could just tell from your application that you like for him to see things through. You do give him a voice, but you also like him to finish what he starts." And so I was like, "Well, yes, that's true, and I'll talk to him." So when I was talking to him, he said, "Yes, I just don't believe I want to go to this other school." And I said, "Well, we're going to be visiting them soon, but here's what we're going to do." I said, "On paper, this looks like the place for you, the place we just left. But if we go to the next school and that looks better and that has the resources and, it really is where you want to go, then we will do that. So how is that?" And so he was like, "Yes." He said, "I will. If we go to this other place that I think I want to go, and that's not the one, yes, I will go to this school." And so it turns out that we did go to the other school, and it was so much better for him. They had so much, and in fact, this was a public school because we were looking at a private school, and it turned out that the public school had so much more. And plus, he wanted to be there, was in our neighborhood. He knew children there. And it was a wonderful experience for him. But, I did, once upon a time, or certainly when I was growing up, I don't know if I would have had that much say about
Yeah.
where I was going to school. And I'm so glad that I let him weigh in, and we actually had that give and take. That's so important.
Yes, yes. I must say, with my child that's on the IEP, we've kind of had the opposite. Last year, we had a challenging year at school. Here at the school that he was attending, there was a bad experience with a teacher called him a racially charged a
Mm.
monkey. Basically, a teacher called him a monkey,
Oh,
and
wow. Mhm.
it took a lot of advocacy behind the scene to make complaints at the school, at the district level, and just follow up on the inappropriateness, the school, and their response to it, which went responded to until we really made enough noise with the district. And so, make a long story short, the school really kind of made it comfortable for that teacher because the conversation they had with my son is this teacher has been my friend for 26 years. I know he couldn't have said anything to mean anything, any harm. And so when we were able to, finally the district got involved, and then there was a meeting held, and my son is always again, I'll tell you, he don't want to be at these meetings. He's like, I don't want to be there. And for me as an adult that grew up without anybody advocating for me, I really needed to feel like he needed to be in the room to hear what's being said, to
Mhm.
understand language, to know when we need his input because nobody can speak from his experience.
Right.
And this was a very valuable lesson for him to be in this meeting to hear, even if they didn't take accountability, for him to have a voice to say that I was mistreated and I didn't, and to give input on how he felt in that moment.
Mhm.
And it's a conversation that I really didn't ask him at home about how he felt and what, about what the teacher said. But a very pointed question, the guy from the district asked him, "How did that make you feel?" And my son said, in his seventh grade voice, it was a slap in my face. It made me feel like they didn't think I was smart enough to understand that he was taking up for him, and that he was basically, nobody was there to have my back. And they
Mhm.
were just there to support the teacher. And I was blown away because it was like my child on an IEP. I needed them to understand that he's not ignorant, he's not dumb, he's not slow. He
Right.
learns differently. And as soon as we can accommodate the way he learns, the way he can contribute in a way that is meaningful to your side and his side. But as soon as as long as the scales are tilted where it's an advantage to the teachers and they don't really have to accommodate him, then you're going to see a side of him that really is distracting to everybody. And so I
Right.
think that's what the IEP has started to show me, is that when we have an effective IEP, he wants to engage, he wants to learn, he has resources, he can even now advocate for himself. And I think it's through sitting in those meetings where he was able to say hard things that he didn't want to be present to say, but walk out of those meetings with his head a little higher. And this is a kid that doesn't make eye contact. But once we were in that meeting, he was able to speak to the teachers, and one of the principal and the vice principal and the other vice principal apologized to him. He looked up off the floor, out his hands, and made eye contact with him. And it just made the biggest difference in the world. That,
Mhm.
even if the teacher didn't get the consequence we thought he should get, my son walked out of here knowing that he was, his parents had his back, that he had a voice, and that that moment he felt vindicated.
Wow, that is so important. And so for people whose children have an IEP, what do you think they should do? What practice should they put in place so that they can be comfortable ensuring that the school implements their IEP and really honors their child in the classroom with respect?
Yeah. First off, I'd say, like you talked about, connecting with your child and having a regular check-in every day about how school is. Because
Hmm.
I think children that may learn differently, and especially children that's experienced the foster care system, they
Hmm.
may not know how to advocate for themselves or when they've been mistreated. And so they will kind of let things go sometimes, thinking, "Oh, they didn't mean any harm," or that's really my friend, or that's my teacher. And it took another kid, matter of fact, a white kid, to tell my son, "You need to tell your parents," because that was inappropriate. And
Okay.
so we had a check-in system, and he came home and told me that day. It was so hard to believe, but by the next day, we were going up to the school to address that with the teacher. Um,
Hmm.
it's also important that they, even when they don't want to come, to be a part of those meetings. So because they are the subject and we're talking about them, and my son felt like, being in school, kids kind of feel like they don't have a lot of say so over things.
Right.
And in those meetings, they do get a chance to have some say so over what works for me. They also get some say so about, this is what works for me. If I'm having a bad day, I need this kind of support. If I'm having a bad day, this is what you'll see. And
Hmm.
they are able to really they are in tune with themselves. Instead of us adults trying to recreate the wheel, we invite them in the room and like get the knowledge and wisdom from them. And then we can create an effective plan instead of us adults trying to make a plan around them and for them without including them.
Hmm. Yeah, it sounds like uh, you definitely feel that the importance of them being in the room. We had those kinds of meetings as well. Sometimes he was there, and then sometimes he wasn't. And they definitely sometimes they do feel a little self conscious about it. But it is nice to be able to speak up for yourself. And then also, I think for children to see like this team of people that want to help you succeed. They want to see
Yeah,
you win,
exactly.
ideally.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
yes.
Because
And
especially on
mhm.
the other end of just getting complaints from teachers, they actually hear the teachers speak well about them, which they don't always think teachers like them. And so I think it was able to give my son a different side of the teachers that he's in the classroom with.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
When we think about parents of Black children, do you find that in your experience that they feel hesitant to speak up, and what would you recommend for them to really build confidence to advocate for their children's needs? It might not be special educational needs, but that's their needs as children, and their unique perspectives as Black children.
Yes, I would say definitely, because I felt that. I felt that I was in a silo, and it was an isolated incident. And the more I talked to other parents and I just voiced my concerns, I even put anything out on on the internet, or like there was a Clackamas website or a school district Facebook page that just talked about the challenges they're facing, and it was a lot more common than I was aware of. And so,
Mhm.
or that when the school will talk to you, this is an isolated event. You have zero tolerance, and you start realizing behind the scene there's a lot more tolerance than is being talked about. And so it just helped to be, because before we don't really want to make any trouble. We don't want to
Mhm.
rifle any feathers. We just want to make sure that they know about it and do something about it. But when the school doesn't respond in an appropriate manner to keep our children safe, and they are our most prized possession, and I hate to say it that way, but the law recognizes children as possessions of the
Mhm.
adults that bore them. And so,
Mhm.
if we're dropping our children off to people, we expect them to be safe, we expect them to be cared for, and so that's what we're going to demand. And if you don't feel like that's being happened for your child, you have every right to speak up. I think, as there's a lot of stereotypes out there in in the community and worldwide about angry Black woman. So I think it can hinder our ability to want to get angry or to want to go speak up out of anger. But I think anger is the thing that should move you. If something's telling you to speak, you need to speak. You don't go do it in anger, but anger is what is telling you that you need to act. And so I would say, if you're feeling angered or moved in your spirit by something your children is telling you, or what you know about that school, I think it's imperative that you speak up.
Absolutely. You absolutely should act on those feelings when you feel like something's out of line. You're back in the swing of school, homework, and soccer practice week after week. So, Mom, I'm wondering, are you feeling overwhelmed by meltdowns and backtalk? Struggling to connect with your kids? It's time for a change. Introducing the All Access Pass to the Parent and Purpose Summit Family First Edition. Learn from top experts in mental health, parenting strategies, and self-care. Transform your family life with practical skills to guide your child's behavior in a positive way, reconnect as a family, practice life-changing self-care, and so much more. Invest in your family's happiness and your well-being. Don't miss the opportunity for real change. Grab your all-access pass now at parentandpurpose.com and step into a season of transformation and joy. Another thing I found too that worked really well for both of my children was just really starting the year off on the right page with them. I would send an email to all of the teachers, especially in middle school because they have multiple teachers. But I would always send that out, introducing myself and my husband and just talking about how excited we are for the year. I tell them a little bit about each child. He loves doing this or that. He struggles a little bit with organization, or he might be a little quiet and something, but just to tell them a little bit about our child, and always finish on the note that I'm part of the team. So if there's anything that I need to be doing at home, absolutely let me know so I can support what you're doing. And then I would share things periodically that we were doing at home, and maybe they could reinforce it at school. Like, oh, he learned how to do this, and maybe he'd be able to help you out in class with that. But what I feel that it did, aside from the information that it provided, it just reminded them of the parents when they're looking at this sea of 26 students, say, and when they looked at my children, they saw the parents behind them. They saw the support behind them.
Yeah.
Because even with teachers, I mean, that's a big responsibility, having 26 to 30 children in your class sometimes. And it's just easy to overlook children, or I mean, because they're human. It's a lot. It's a lot that teachers are doing, even under the best of circumstances, with the best of intentions.
Yeah.
But that's just a little something that can remind them that, if a child is not turning in homework, or is maybe talking too much in class, or doing anything like that, because of the relationship with parents, you could say, well, I think his parents would probably want to know this,
Yes.
and let me send a note or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And that helps. And then, as I said, at home, we can just, we can support what
Yeah.
the teacher is doing. And I think that goes really a long way to letting
Yeah.
them know, because, man, teachers, we've got to pay them more money. We're asking them to do a lot. I mean, they even do a lot more than when I was coming through school.
Yeah.
They're dealing with behavior problems that, honestly, my teachers didn't have to deal with, because that we already knew what would happen if we didn't behave in school.
Yeah.
And so, and there's just different philosophies on that. I feel like sometimes some parents send their children to school and feel like they're going to solve all the whatever problems they have, that take care of it between 9 and 3. They're your responsibility. Whatever happens, I don't want to hear anything about it. And
Yeah.
that's really not the way it goes.
No.
And so, anything you can do to help teachers know that they have someone on their side as they help your children
Yes.
makes such a difference.
And I must say, not knocking the schools at all, because I know that, especially down here, when you were talking about classrooms, our my son's, one of his math classes was 70 students. So
70?
70 students. And he was falling through the cracks, and you've seen a lot of more behavioral problems because they have all these groups of kids with one teacher. And it was just, you can just imagine the chaos. So I know the teachers are overworked and underpaid and understaffed. But at the end of the day, it's at the detriment of the children who get left behind. And then if you can kind of excuse it by behavioral problems, then you don't have to deal with them, because you can just blame it on the kid instead of the school actually making class sizes manageable and making sure they have adequate staff to be able to teach the children, and that the children are put in the level that is going to accommodate the level that they are. But I must say, in this school that my son was at, was just, I did those things that you were talking about in the beginning of the school year. I would send a text, a behind the scene, in the school provided direct contact that we have with the teachers. And I would send one every year to my son, starting in 6th grade. I did it in 7th grade. And the teacher that whose class he was in, where the substitute called him that name, had never responded to any of my
Oh, wow.
emails. I would invite all the teachers to his IEP meetings. He never responded. And matter of fact, after this incident happened, because after he called the teacher the bad name and we responded to school, the teacher started now trying to cover his back. And he's, the other teacher, make a long story short, ended up saying, I never knew he was on an IEP. So I had to go back and forward to the school all the emails that I had sent to him, inviting him to his IEP meetings, giving him my phone number, that if he had any problems, that I was a kind of open door parent, that he could call me about anything. And I saw things work best when the bridge between school and parents was not divided, and it just stayed divided. And so I think, again, it goes to the overloading of the school, and also the quality of the teachers, if they're really following up and making sure that if parents are going out of their way to make contact with you, to give you extra information on how to parent their child or teach their child, that you're being responsive to it.
Absolutely, yes. Now that experience I didn't have, but you're right. You certainly, also, by doing that, you are creating a paper trail.
Yeah.
For sure. And principals and administrators definitely need to know if teachers are not being responsive now.
Yeah. And sometimes I think we have the idea, because we can be moving on up, maybe a more affluent neighborhood means that the school system will be better, a public school system, and that's not necessarily the case. Earlier, when I talked about having the opposite experience of your son, when an opportunity came for us to go to a charter school this year, my son did. He was, I had to pull him away from that old school kicking and screaming because he just wanted to return back to that school with his friends. And I had to explain to him, son, it's bigger than the experience you have with the teacher. It's that you were failing and the school was content with you failing. And we needed a fresher start. We needed a smaller classrooms. First off, we needed a school with a reputation of teachers going out of their way to help the children. And we've received that at this school. And even though, his grades are going up, he's doing better. I can see more
That's
confidence.
wonderful.
He still wants to go back to the school where all his friends were, and it's a bigger school. And so I wanted to just say that sometimes kids may not agree, but if we know what's best for them and the evidence is showing that they may not see it our way, we sometimes have to go against the grain and just kind of pull them kicking and screaming.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, just like even in the story that I said, if the other school looked like it wasn't going to deliver, we were going back to that school.
Yeah.
For sure. So, in the end, it worked out, but absolutely. But I think that by having the conversation with them, you really have them taking an active role in their learning. Like they are consumers of education, and they have certain standards of service and that they should expect. And I think it also sets them up to think of themselves as lifelong learners and think about the information they're consuming and the sources of the information and learn how to discriminate or discern good sources of information and not so good sources of information. And I think it can start with them taking an active role in their education, like you described. So I hope that he stays in his school and continues to excel there, because I have a feeling when all is said and done, he'll look back and say it was a good thing for him, especially because you're saying he's excelling, he's doing well. And my children are old enough to give that kind of feedback now. They're 25, and more than once on different things, not specifically about the school, they've said things like, "Oh man, I sure hated when you dragged me out of the house to go to do X, but I can see it was a good thing." And I'm gonna have my children do that.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, wow, okay, I guess I did know a little something, because in the teen years, there's a block of time when we don't know anything. We don't know what we're talking about. So
And they don't appreciate nothing.
So yeah, and you already know with your older children that he probably will look back on this and realize that it was for his benefit.
Yes, I definitely will. I mean, this 8th grade year, whereas before it was so challenging, this year, now that he's on track with regular schooling, we can add a tutor to the mix. And he's a kid that would fall out if he had to do anything extra, but we're able to acknowledge his dyslexia by having a tutor extra couple times a week. We can see a big change, a leap in his reading and his math. He's getting A's on his math tests. And I mean, he's just a different student. I'm just going to stay the course, and I'm just grateful to the higher power that kind of sends you what you need right on time. I can't take
love it.
Yeah, I can't even take any credit for it. It's just really about, just that speaking up and speaking out when need be, and then I'll direct your path.
Right. Wow, I really love it. Do you have any closing thoughts on your experience or anything else that you'd like to add about advocating for your Black child in school?
Yes, I would close out with just saying that to trust our guts. I can only imagine, especially with my own trauma of being a young teen parent, and just that idea around parenting, harboring my own stuff, and parenting being, you don't want to be seen, you don't want to cause any trouble, you don't want any. I had to release a lot of that to be able to go to the schools and speak up on my kids' behalf. And so I think sometimes not being self-aware can stop us from doing what our kids need us to do. And so I think I would just check in with myself and learn to check in with our children regularly to kind of find out, what kind of involvement do I need at the school? Do I need to, we're already doing our conferences and everything, but do I need to be volunteering? And that's kind of a move I needed to make. I needed to see how my son was, why was he getting in all this trouble? I needed to experience him in the classroom and see what that looks like. And it just kind of allowed him to not just sit, because I think he was thinking I was there to get him in trouble. I'm like, I can't get you in any trouble here. I'm just coming to be with you. So I care that much about you that I don't want them mistreating you, but I also don't want you to mistreat an opportunity that you have to go and be the best kid that you can be and that you show the other students and the other teachers. And so I noticed that also was a relationship building between me and him, that it wasn't even about the school. It was really about him seeing how far my parent will go to not just discipline me, but to support me. And so
Mm-hmm.
I just say be flexible and that, even if your kid doesn't agree with being a support to them, how you see a support, I would get advice. There's wisdom amongst a multitude of counselors, but also, listen to that little voice inside of you that's telling you how to connect better with your
Mm-hmm.
child.
I love that. I love what you said there. And also something else you said that I didn't realize was actually a big problem until I saw the research. But there are a lot of parents that may have had an unpleasant experience with school, just in general, whatever it may mean, whether it's special needs or being mistreated by a teacher, and that then affecting how they engage with the school on behalf of their own children. Like they don't want to be connected. They don't see the teacher as a partner. And I guess because I didn't have a negative experience with school per se, and my parents didn't express any problems in engaging with my schools growing up. I didn't realize that, but it really that stays with people, and it just manifests again when they find themselves in the situation with their own children being in school and having to interact with teachers. I did not realize that, but there's a lot of research about that. So that's important. We've got to definitely let go or recognize and manage some of our biases and tendencies, and push them away, push them aside, so that we can do what we need to do for our children. So
Yeah.
that's very important. So how can we follow you on social media?
I am on social media under Top Priority Investigations. I am my website, Top Priority Investigation, and I am on Facebook as Jammie Carr. So feel free to check in, join me. I love to connect with you on social media, however I could be a support. I mean, we're always, we have our main things that we do, but we have so many layers
Mhm.
to us. And I appreciate you being able to allow me to come back and kind of pull this layer back, because sometimes just the being here, I'm processing things that I probably didn't just sit down and think about. And so this is
Mhm.
to kind of sit down and think about moment. And so, yeah, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you were here because I think that you said a lot that parents really need to consider. And especially now, in the climate that we find ourselves in, now more than ever, we have to step up for our children and make sure that they, especially when they're young, so that
Yeah.
they can get a solid start, a healthy start, so that when they grow up and or go out into the world, that they're well adjusted and resourceful in
Yes.
tackling the challenges that life's going to throw at them, because we all have them. So
Yes. And I mean,
yes.
they either learn to react or avoid through us. And I think, growing up, I'm sure it was unintentional, but my mom was an avoider. She didn't want to cause any trouble. So as an adult, it really forced me to say I have to be a doer because my children there's just situations when you, especially for children of minorities, whether it be girls attending all boys or school or events, you really do have to recognize that there are going to be some times where the children are the minority, and we have to not take things that are swept under the rug lightly. And we, even if it's just to make a statement, it doesn't have to be a big thing. Sometimes you
Mhm.
don't get to file complaints because they're responsive, and you're bringing the incident to their attention. But sometimes if they aren't responsive, sometimes you got to go to the next level because you don't want this to happen to the next child. We don't want to pass these problems on to our next generation. We want to pass down to them the solutions.
Right, right. And address it when it first bubbles up, when it's a small problem or concern, before it does become a major crisis. That can also make a difference too. But thank you so much for joining us for this impactful conversation, Jammie. And remember, parents, we have the power to confidently advocate for our children and ensure that they get the support they deserve. We just have to step up. And so until next time, I want everyone to stay empowered and keep parenting with purpose. And I want to give you an opportunity to grab my free guide, The Black Parent Experience. And that's at parentandpurpose.com/theblackparentexperience. There are tools and resources there to help you on the journey so that you can show up and advocate for your child and just really provide an enriching experience for your child in school and outside. So thanks again for joining, and follow us at the Parenting 411 on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also catch this episode on YouTube as well. And in the meantime, remember that it's never too late to be the parent you want to be. Thanks for listening, and I can't wait to see you next time.
We bring you this episode for the purpose of information and entertainment only. It is not the intent or purpose of the Parenting 411 podcast or Carol Muleta to provide an exhaustive reference or guide on all aspects of parenting, childcare, and family life. You are strongly encouraged to read all available information, consult medical or other appropriate professionals, and pursue all reasonable means to learn as much as possible about parenting to complement what you gain here, and then tailor the information to meet your individual needs. Yes, parenting is a serious matter, though it is not an exact science. The context and insights offered in this and every episode represent an account of knowledge and personal experiences of the host and any featured guests for the viewers' and listeners' information and consideration. The host and guests do not guarantee to our viewers or listeners any specific parenting outcomes from this episode or taking actions described here.